This is breaking news.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Doug Williams. Breaking news at this hour. Luigi Mangione, the suspect accused of killing UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, has officially waived extradition, will now be transported by plane back here to New York City. NYPD detectives traveled to Pennsylvania last night to bring Mangione back to the city for an arraignment that could happen now in just a matter of hours. On Tuesday, the 26-year-old suspect was indicted on 11 charges, including first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism, accused of killing Thompson on the morning of December 4th outside the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Police say he traveled to Manhattan and lied in wait for Thompson before walking up behind him and shooting him in the back and in the leg. Let's go to CBS News New York reporter Allie Bauman. She's live for us this morning in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. She had a seat inside the courtroom during that hearing. Allie, tell us what that was like.
So, Doug, right now, Luigi Mangione is in the custody of the NYPD. As you mentioned, I was inside the courtroom for that hour-and-a-half appearance that just happened. I was seated actually inside the jury box, so I had a direct view, the ideal view of being able to see all of what was going on and being able to get a straight-on view of Luigi during the entire 90-minute proceeding. So it was a packed courtroom. I mean, there were people sitting on the floors, people standing in the back. It was people waiting outside to get in. Right now, behind me, actually, there are even supporters of Luigi that are outside here with signs saying "Free Luigi." There were both reporters in the courtroom, as well as members of the public and supporters of him who had previously been joining the people out here. Now, throughout the proceeding, Mangione, he came in, he was clean shaven, wearing a orange jumpsuit. He was in shackles, both handcuffs around his ankles and his wrists. He appeared to be more subdued than his appearance last week when we were here, where he was swiveling around in his chair more. He was looking around the room more. At this point, he seemed to be a little bit more subdued. He spoke for a long period of time to his attorney while he was seated in the chair. Could not hear, obviously what the two were talking about, but he had seemed relaxed. He at times was even smiling and shrugging and being very expressive with his facial expressions as he was discussing there. So during that appearance, Luigi and his attorney signed the waivers for his extradition, and the DA actually requested specifically that after he be signed those papers and the judge accept them, that he be remanded directly into the custody of the NYPD instead of returning to the Pennsylvania prison first, where he's been held since his arrest last week. And again, Luigi seemed relaxed while he was sitting in the chair, even though he had at least a dozen NYPD officers and detectives seated right behind him in the front row of the courtroom, wearing their uniforms, wearing bulletproof vests, some of them, waiting for that extradition so that they could immediately take him into custody and bring him back to Manhattan right now. So after the proceeding was over, they signed the papers. The sheriffs brought him back into the back room of the courtroom, and now he's being brought into NYPD custody to presumably be brought over to Manhattan. Doug?
So, Allie, what now? What is your impression of what happens when Luigi Mangione makes his way back to New York City?
Doug, so we know that he's going to be flown directly to New York City. It's about a half hour to the airport and about an hour flight to New York City. So as soon as he's able to leave this courtroom and fills out all the appropriate paperwork, he potentially could be back in New York in a matter of 2 hours or so. So after that point, initially we were hearing that he was going to be going directly to the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse for his arraignment on the charges from the state, on the murder one charges from the state. It is possible now that he may potentially be facing federal charges, that he could be going to federal court. But at this hour, we know that he's going to be going and going directly to Manhattan to be arraigned on the state charges.
And part of the, Allie, the extradition being waived means you've said in your reporting he will likely head to Rikers Island. Do we know anything else about what his incarceration in New York will be like?
Yes, assuming that he's remanded after the arraignment in Manhattan, he's going to likely, as according to our law enforcement sources, go to Rikers Island, where we're told he's going to be held in isolation, in protective custody there, because he's such a high-profile figure that has garnered so much attention with this case.
And you mentioned the potential looming federal charges that may change the exact location of the courtroom that he will be in, we assume, later today in Manhattan. Can you talk more about the 11 charges that Mangione faces from the state as of now that we know of?
Yeah, so right now, as of Tuesday, after the district attorney in Manhattan he was indicted on the 11 charges for the murder of the UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. The top charge there is murder in the first degree in furtherance of terrorism. Murder in the first degree is a particularly rare charge for New York City. Usually he's also been charged with murder too, one of those being as an act of terrorism. So in order to have murder one, there has to be some sort of extra nugget there, whether it is in terms of a serial killer or someone who has killed a witness or killed a cop. Obviously, none of those were the cases here, but that is why that terrorism charge has been connected with murder one. He's also been charged with 2 counts of murder as well, in addition to the forgery charges and the gun charges for the ghost gun that they said he had with them at his arrest.
Ali Bauman, thank you so much for joining us from outside the courthouse there in Pennsylvania. You've been seeing on your screen a live shot of we missed the moment that we could have seen Luigi Mangione's face as he got into that vehicle. Again, he is on his way to New York City. He will not be traveling here by vehicle, but he's being transported by the NYPD to a local airport. He will arrive at a local airport in New York City, in the New York City area, in just a matter of hours. And certainly we await his arrival. We'll bring you, obviously, coverage throughout the day once he gets here and we learn more about the court proceedings that follow. I do want to sort of unpack this latest development a little bit further. We have trial attorney Rich Schoenstein joining us to unpack the legal side of this. So thank you so much, Rich, for joining us. Can you walk us through what these next couple hours will look like, particularly when Mangione gets to Manhattan, assuming it's the criminal courthouse, could be the federal court? Just take us through what to expect in those hours ahead.
Sure. Well, my expectation is in the first instance, he's going to go to the Manhattan criminal court to face the state charges. He's already been indicted by a grand jury, so those charges are pending. He can be arraigned. He'll go into court. He'll formally be charged. He can enter a plea. And at some point, there'll be some discussion. I'm sure he will ask for bail, which I expect will be denied, but there will be some discussion about that. There's been discussion that federal charges are going to be brought, but as far as I know, those haven't been brought yet. So I don't expect to see him in the federal courthouse right away.
We heard from Mangione's attorney this morning, and I want to read part of what she said. Quote, the federal government's reported decision to pile on top of an already overcharged first-degree murder and state terror case is highly unusual, raises serious constitutional and statutory double jeopardy concerns. We are ready to fight these charges in whatever court they are brought. What's your analysis of the charges? Do they seem fair to you?
Yeah, well, she's a great lawyer and a very experienced prosecutor. And I can assure you, when she was serving as a prosecutor, she wouldn't have thought this was overcharging. I mean, this is somebody who killed a man in the back to make a statement. So he's charged with murder in the first degree, which I think is the appropriate charge. I agree with your reporter. It's there. The terrorism part is there because it's a necessary component to get to first-degree murder. Intentional killing in New York is only second-degree murder, and the difference is you can't get life imprisonment without parole unless you get convicted of first-degree murder. So they had to add the terrorism aggravating factor to ratchet it up to first degree so they can try to get life imprisonment without parole.
So I think that's such a valuable explanation in terms of how they got the charge of the sort of evoking terror in the first-degree murder charge. But if you're a prosecutor, how are you able to prove that, as the DA Alvin Bragg said, that the killing was, quote, intended to evoke terror?
Well, I think the theory is that this defendant wanted to send a message with this killing. He had no personal connection that we know about to Brian Thompson. He didn't have an individual gripe with him. This killing was designed to make a statement about the healthcare industry. And you can have whatever opinion you want to have about the healthcare industry, but shooting a guy in the back on the street to make a statement, that's not the way we make statements in this country. And it is to send a message. It is arguably to invoke fear in people who work in that industry and maybe even to persuade them, I don't know, to change what they're doing. And I think that's the kind of argument that's going to be made to support the terrorism charge.
And Rich, you mentioned earlier that Mangione's returning to New York City to these grand jury in criminal court. And you also mentioned really the idea that he will and his legal team will ask for bail. You said you expect that to be denied. Take us through in these 11 counts what you expect the court proceedings to look like, not just later this afternoon, but going forward.
Well, the counts are, so there's the first-degree murder charge that we were just talking about. He also has 2 counts against him of second-degree murder, so that if you can't prove the terrorism component, you could possibly still convict him on second-degree murder. And then the remainder of the charges have to do with possession of a weapon or a forged instrument. And so those are much lesser charges, but they're included because they seem to be related to this crime. He'll be formally arraigned on all of those charges. He'll enter a plea on all of those charges, presumably a not guilty plea. He will make an application, I would assume, for bail. It will be denied, I assume. And then we will enter the period of, preparation for a trial eventually, where the prosecution is going to continue its investigation, assemble its evidence. It has a duty to disclose that evidence to the defense, which will also be carrying on its investigation. There could be interim motions in the court going about the charges and this and that, but mostly I think it's going to be mostly behind the scenes.
Can you help explain, because I was listening, you said presume the not guilty plea once he's back in New York City, and the attorney in Pennsylvania said he would plead not guilty in the case in New York, Pennsylvania, wherever. Can you explain to someone who's not super familiar with law how somebody with the mounting evidence, the investigation that led to his arrest, would plead not guilty in these charges?
So everybody who is brought up on charges in this country, it's one of the great things about our legal system, has a right to have a trial. And the prosecution is required to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, to prove that to a jury and to get a unanimous jury to return a conviction. And we see lots of cases where the evidence looks pretty overwhelming, but the defendant takes advantage of those constitutional rights and requires the prosecution to do its job, to prove all of that stuff. And that's every defendant's right, and that's what every defense lawyer should be doing. That's how the system works, by having the defense challenge that. By the way, one thing we didn't discuss yet, at some point there may be plea discussions between this defendant and the prosecutor. I mean, one possibility is that they will discuss some sort of plea where he would accept guilt on some of the charges in exchange for perhaps for not having to spend his whole life in jail.
That is interesting to hear, because you're right, we have not discussed that yet. And one of the things that one of the reasons judges work so hard to keep public opinion out of courtrooms is because of all the coverage of this, the public now associates Luigi Mangione with the murder of Brian Thompson. However, like every American who goes to trial, he is innocent until proven guilty. Can you take us through just the basics in terms of the evidence? We mentioned the not guilty plea. How damning is the evidence, or how difficult a job will it be for the defense to try and get some sort of wiggle room in the reasonable doubt category?
Well, I haven't been able to see the evidence, and I'm going to temper this a little bit, because I too want to see the evidence at trial. I think that's important to see it's presented. My understanding is that he was located in Pennsylvania by authorities with evidence on his person that connects him to the crime. I think a gun, I think some papers that connects him to the crime. I believe there's going to be testimony identifying him as having been in New York, as having stayed at that hostel that was mentioned on the Upper West Side in the days at issue here. I don't think the video evidence at the scene is good enough to prove conclusively it was him. I'm not sure if there's any video evidence of a person escaping on a bicycle that's good enough to prove it was him. So it's going to be largely a circumstantial case. I understand also there's evidence about things he's written or maybe posted on social media about his views on the healthcare industry that would sort of substantiate a motive. Remember, typically you don't have to prove a motive to prove a murder case, but if you're going to argue the guy's a terrorist, then you sort of do have to prove a motive.
Interesting. So you're saying that the addition of the terrorism part of the murder one charge may actually give the prosecution more work to do in terms of the analyzing the evidence to prove the exact wording of that murder one charge.
It absolutely gives the prosecution more work to do. To prove murder two, all they need to prove is he's the guy who did it, that he came to New York, that he had a ghost gun, that he got to the guy on the street and shot him on the back. And no one needs to know why he did that to prove murder two. That is obviously an intentional killing if it happened that way. So it would suffice for the requirements of a murder two charge. But the murder one charge says act of terrorism. And I think you're going to have to peer into his motivation to prove that. I do think it's a tougher sell on the evidence, which is why some people have been critical of the charge.
Trial attorney Rich Schoenstein, can't thank you enough. This has been a really interesting conversation and very helpful for myself and I'm sure our viewers as well. Rich, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Once again, this has been special breaking news coverage on the extradition of UnitedHealthcare CEO, the shooting suspect, Luigi Mangione. I'm Doug Williams. Again, we did get a look at the suspect walking out of the courtroom just moments ago. He is now on his way back to New York City. Should be here by this afternoon. He's traveling by plane, we're told. And we will have continuing coverage and a breakdown of what exactly will happen next in the city as he makes his way down into Lower Manhattan to criminal court. Coming up, that is all coming up on CBS News New York at noon, and it will follow at 5 and 6. And for updates anytime, please go to cbsnewyork.com.
This has been breaking news.